Did Cardinal Donald Wuerl lie? Tonight, analysis of what the outgoing leader of Washington, D.C. knew about disgraced former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Plus, new details on the Vatican summit to combat sex abuse. Capitol showdown. Team coverage of the partial government shutdown, including Nancy Pelosi's unusual request regarding the State of the Union. Fighting for the faithful. A new report says persecution of Christians around the world is on the rise. And parental guidance. Why the Holy Father says God is to be loved, not feared. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 16th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Cardinal Donald Wuerl says he forgot he knew about claims of sex abuse against disgraced former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. He previously denied that he knew. Wuerl had been named in a Pennsylvania grand jury report as knowing about other priest sex abuse cases. Last year, Pope Francis accepted Wuerl's resignation, and now he is issuing an apology in a letter to priests. Wuerl, who's now the apostolic administrator, not the archbishop for the Archdiocese of Washington, says, quote, "It is important for me to accept personal responsibility and apologize for this lapse of memory." Joining me now is Edward Condon, the Washington, D.C. editor for Catholic News Agency. Ed, you broke this story last week with your colleague, J.D. Flynn. Is he lying?
We simply don't know. What is clear is that Cardinal Wuerl did receive an accusation of some sort of misconduct against Archbishop McCarrick in 2004. We know that he went and met with the papal nuncio in person. We know that he presented this accusation to him. So in that sense, he did everything he was supposed to do at that point.
And what is at issue right now is whether he forgot that he did that or not.
That's right. So over the last 7 months, he's been asked repeatedly, as you'd expect, what he knew and when about his predecessor as Archbishop of Washington, D.C. Now, Cardinal Wuerl was very clear in the beginning, saying he was shocked to hear allegations.
He said that to me right here on News Nightly. I'm shocked, I'm saddened, it's terrible, no, I didn't know.
That's right. He said he'd never even heard rumors of misconduct against Archbishop McCarrick. Now, the problem is, it now seems that he definitely did know about accusations of misconduct against Archbishop McCarrick, very familiar ones, things that we've come to hear a lot of, a beach house, sharing beds with seminarians, things like that. So the question really is, why was he unable to come forward with that information right from the beginning of last summer?
Well, I would say the question is, why is he still apostolic administrator?
Well, the simple answer to that is because that's what he was appointed to be, and that position will lapse when his successor is announced, and we don't know when that will be. We've been expecting it.
All right, let's look at this apology letter. Former priest Robert, is it Siolek?
I think
that's what we're saying.
Siolek,
okay, who raised the allegations against former Cardinal McCarrick, described the apology from Cardinal Wuerl like this. In the end, it's lacking in truth and substance. I do not believe for one moment that he forgot. I do not. And he continues saying, substantively, it doesn't all add up. He's shown himself to be better at expressing sorrow for action of others, but he remains unable or unwilling to acknowledge the truth of his own actions. What message is all of this apology, this denial, sending to survivors?
Well, I don't think it's sending a very positive message to survivors or to ordinary Catholics in the Archdiocese of Washington or the United States, for that matter. Really, at this point, Cardinal Wuerl is caught between two letters that he's issued to his priests, which have functioned effectively as press releases. The first saying that he was unable to come forward with this previous knowledge he had because he was bound by confidentiality and he was protecting the identity of victims, and that was the reason. Now, in the more recent letter released overnight, he said that he suffered from a lapse of memory, that he'd received this allegation in 2004 and 14 years had passed and it had passed out of his mind. Now, a lot of people are saying it can't be both. He can't have deliberately chose not to address these accusations because of confidentiality and having forgotten about them at the same time.
What a mess. All right, we'll leave it there. Edward Condon, D.C. editor for Catholic News Agency. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
And the Vatican is speaking out, saying Pope Francis will attend all sessions of a global summit on clergy sex abuse in late February.
The February meeting on the protection of minors has a concrete purpose. The goal is that all of the bishops clearly understand what they need to do to prevent and combat the worldwide problem of the sexual abuse of minors.
Alessandro Gisotti, who's running the Vatican press office, says the Pope doesn't want the summit to be academic, but rather pastoral. Last year, Pope Francis invited bishops from around the world to the Vatican to address the global crisis. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, the abuse crisis has hit the Pope's credibility. Is this why he's attending every session?
Could be, Lauren. He does tend to attend every session of other meetings that he convenes, say the Council of 9 Cardinals that he convokes every 3 months. He's there for every session. He often listens to the discussions, and then he chimes in when he needs to. He did the same thing during the Synod last October and synods previous to that. It's the way that he operates, it seems. We can be very sure, though, that he's interested to show the world that he's doing everything that he can do to fight abuse.
Sounds like it's his management style. So what details have been released about the meeting?
So we just heard today that there will be, the meetings will be characterized by prayer and discernment, is how the Vatican's press officer, Alessandro Gisotti, put it. He said there will be a penitential liturgy, which is like a prayer service where the bishops will be asking for forgiveness and God's help. There will also be a closing mass, final mass that wasn't until now announced. There will also be working groups, plenary sessions, witnesses who will give talks to the group. We don't yet know who they are, but all of this will also be moderated by a Vatican point man for communications, which is Father Federico Lombardi, who's the ex-Vatican spokesman. During the years of Benedict XVI, he spent a lot of time answering for the Church on the abuse crisis, in particular in 2010 when the Irish church abuse reports came out. It was devastating.
You mentioned witness testimony. Victims are very important in all of this. We've had many on the show talking about their disappointment. Tell me, how do we know how they're going to be involved? And have you spoken to any? Are they reacting to this?
Well, we don't have the full extent of their participation in these meetings yet, Lauren. The bishops were asked by the Pope in the lead up to these February meetings to meet with victims back in their diocese to prepare. We can presume that those witness testimonies that will be a part of these meetings could be also from victims. One in particular, Marie Collins, has been very, very active in her participation in the Commission for the Protection of Minors until she resigned a couple of years back. She asked that bishops be held accountable, and the Pope actually named names, calling people out, just to make sure that everything is clear and there's as much transparency as possible. She's also asked that the safeguarding measures be rendered universal, that all of the Church in all of the world be held to the same standard. She said in places where the status quo is perhaps less than the Church standard, the Church needs to raise it up and not lower it to the standards of the nations that surround them.
Right, and that's what was said by the Pope about the management of the bishops here in the U.S. They need to change their management style. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Lauren.
Jesuits in the northeastern United States released a list of 50 priests credibly accused of sexual abuse. All but 15 are dead, and none of the claims took place after 1997. 2 are former priests and are in jail. And in Guam, the Catholic Church today filed for bankruptcy. The move will allow the Archdiocese to avoid trial in dozens of sex abuse lawsuits and enter settlements instead. Nearly 200 victims have made accusations. The church plans to sell non-essential real estate and add the proceeds to a settlement fund. Stay with EWTN News for comprehensive coverage of the sex abuse crisis. EWTN News Nightly will bring you the latest, as will our partners at Catholic News Agency and National Catholic Register. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is asking President Trump to postpone his State of the Union address scheduled for January 29th. She wants it to happen after the government reopens. Team coverage tonight on the latest and the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Mark Irons will have White House reaction, but we will start on Capitol Hill with Jason Calvi. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Speaker Pelosi cites security concerns. The California Democrat says the Secret Service and Department of Homeland Security have been without funding for almost 4 weeks. Pelosi suggests finding another date.
He could make it from the Oval Office if he wants.
Today, Speaker Nancy Pelosi wrote this letter to President Trump, suggesting the State of the Union be postponed until the government reopens.
This requires hundreds of people working on the logistics and the security of it. Most of those people are either furloughed or victims of the shutdown, the president's shutdown. But that isn't the point.
Republican Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana says the president shouldn't listen.
I'm in labor, not management, but he can come to the Senate if Mrs. Pelosi doesn't want him to come to the House. I just think that sort of tactic is making things worse.
It's day 26 of the shutdown, and some 800,000 federal workers haven't been paid in weeks.
To Senate Republicans, open the government. To Leader McConnell, open the government. To President Trump, open the government.
Democrats oppose President Trump's $5.7 billion demand for a border wall. Members of the conservative House Freedom Caucus say the wall is needed.
It's easy to fix. All we have to do is provide a little funding for border security and build a wall, because what we have at stake are the lives of innocent people. Madam Speaker, I looked in the face of moms today that had lost their kids. It truly broke my heart.
In his speech, the president could share stories like that with the country. Speaker Pelosi is also raising the possibility that he delivers the message in writing, as presidents once did. In fact, Thomas Jefferson only gave the State of the Union in writing. That tradition continued until Woodrow Wilson in 1913. Lauren?
Our historian and Capitol Hill correspondent, Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The White House has not responded to Speaker Pelosi yet, but is calling President Trump's first meeting with a group of rank-and-file Democrats constructive. They belong to a bipartisan group of House lawmakers known as the Problem Solvers Caucus. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Don't let their name fool you. No solution was reached here to end the partial government shutdown. The president continues to demand a border wall. He says it's the only thing that can stop a migrant caravan now traveling from Central America. I asked an official with Catholic Relief Services about that. And today the White House is now acknowledging the shutdown's economic impact.
The White House is responding to growing concerns about how the partial government shutdown could be affecting the economy.
I know that there has been some impact, but at the same time, again, we're focused on the long-term economic principles that the president's laid out, whether it's through deregulation, tax cuts that have helped us give us the booming economy that we have.
The president says he's not willing to reopen the government without funding for his wall. Meanwhile, hundreds of migrants from Central America are slowly winding their way to the U.S. border. The president says they must be stopped. A big new caravan is heading up to our southern border from Honduras. Tell Nancy and Chuck that a drone flying around will not stop them. Only a wall will work.
Not necessarily. What we really need is a more comprehensive approach.
For the past 18 years, Rick Jones with Catholic Relief Services has been working on migration, trafficking, and refugee issues in Central America. Jones says a border wall doesn't address the root causes people flee to escape extreme poverty and gang violence in places like Honduras. He tells me one solution could be to allow migrants to apply for U.S. asylum in their home countries.
That allows, for example, people here in the region who are fleeing violence to get a hearing, an asylum hearing here in the region without having to make the dangerous trip through Mexico.
The White House has announced support for those kind of changes to how asylum could be processed. But of course, the main sticking point, the main thing the president and Democrats disagree about in talks to reopen the government is that border wall. Lauren?
And those people seeking asylum are the ones who need the most attention right now. White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Attorney General nominee William Barr is questioned by senators about his Catholic beliefs. In his confirmation hearing, he's asked why his faith does not disqualify him from public service.
Because you render under Caesar that which is Caesar's, and under God that which is God. And I believe in the separation of church and state. And if there was something that was against my conscience, I wouldn't impose it on others. I would resign my office.
9 character witnesses, good and bad, gave testimony today. A new Marist poll by the Knights of Columbus shows 85% of Americans oppose a religious test for public office. The full Senate could vote on Barr's confirmation as early as next week. At least 16 people, including 2 U.S. troops and 2 American civilians, are dead following an explosion today in Syria. The Islamic State claims responsibility. The strike comes as the U.S. begins to withdraw its 2,000 troops from the war-torn country. At least 21 people, including an American, are dead following a terror attack at a hotel yesterday in Kenya. More than 700 people were evacuated. An extremist group linked to al-Qaeda claimed responsibility. Security officials say all 5 gunmen were killed. The president of the Philippines says he is open to meeting with the country's Catholic bishops. Rodrigo Duterte, who was raised Catholic, continues to disagree publicly with church leaders. He recently suggested citizens of the country should kill the bishops, who remain outspoken in their opposition to his deadly war on drugs. Last month, he called them stupid and said they serve no purpose. Just a few miles from the Vatican, the first Mormon temple in Italy made its debut this week. The 40,000 square foot building is adorned with Swarovski crystal. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints officials say they are in regular contact with the Holy See and often work hand in hand on social issues. Coming up, we'll tell you what countries are the worst violators of religious freedom. Asia Bibi, the Catholic woman set free by a Pakistani court on blasphemy charges, says she still fears for her life. The country's Supreme Court is weighing a petition from Islamic extremists who want her executed. According to a new report, she's not the only one. The persecution of Christians is on the rise around the world. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has details from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The State Department is well aware of Bibi's case, and officials say religious freedom is a key foreign policy priority for the Trump administration. Many Americans hope that's true. The Christian advocacy group Open Doors USA says 30 million more Christians experienced persecution compared to last year. Many of them are worried they'll be forgotten.
This Christian woman tells me she lives a life of fear. Hannah is wearing a burqa because she doesn't want anyone to see her face or know her real name and country. She's from South Asia, where blasphemy laws could result in her going to jail or even death.
Imagine walking down a corridor and the walls around you beginning to come in on you, and the path that you're walking on constantly shifting, constantly changing. And that's the life of a secret believer. That's the life of a Christian.
Hannah is a teacher, but she says she can't teach what is good and true. She's forced to use biased textbooks, which paint non-Muslims as second-class citizens.
From the very earliest days of their exposure to studies, to academics, to learning, they are already being reminded, if they're Christian, they're being reminded that there's no place for you here.
Christians around the world are facing the same persecution, according to Open Doors USA. Their annual watch list identifies the worst violators of religious freedom. North Korea is number 1 again, but so are many countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. David Curry is the group's president.
Essentially what we see is more governments using laws and their police force to control, and in some cases seeking to eliminate the expression of Christian faith.
Hannah prays that won't happen and asks everyone to do the same.
So pray that the Spirit of God would remind us that we are not forgotten and that we are part of a communion of saints and a cloud of witnesses who is ever glorifying His name.
Another disturbing trend, according to Open Doors, more governments are starting to use technology like facial recognition to spy on Christians. China has asked for cameras to be installed in churches so officials can monitor the people in the pews. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Soon to be introduced, state bans on abortion are providing encouragement to pro-life advocates. Legislators in at least 5 states, Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri, Florida, and South Carolina, are expected to consider bills that would ban abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected, possibly 6 weeks into a pregnancy. Joining me now is Michael New, Associate Scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Michael, welcome back to our broadcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Democrats control the House. Pro-choice caucus met yesterday with the head of Planned Parenthood, Leana Wen. We were there trying to question her. Tell us what the state level is up against when it comes to the pro-life movement and Planned Parenthood.
Well, obviously the fact that Democrats now control the House makes it much more difficult to enact legislation at the federal level. We can still do a lot at the state level, though. Republicans control both chambers of the state legislature in over 30 states. And we've seen really most of the action taking place lately at the state level. There's been a big increased number of state-level pro-life laws passed up until between the 80s and 2010. There's an average of 15 state-level laws that were passed. Now, according to Guttmacher, since 2011,
now,
57
Guttmacher is associated with Planned Parenthood.
Right.
And yours is?
Charlotte Lozier Institute is associated with Susan B. Anthony List, a pro-life group. But Guttmacher does track state-level laws, and they've seen a big increase since 2011. So lots of good things are happening at the state level.
What role are Republican women playing?
Glad you asked that. A new study came out in the Journal of Women, Politics and Policy that looked at why some states are passing more pro-life laws than others. And obviously they found that more conservative states were passing more laws than more liberal states, and that shouldn't shock anybody. But one very interesting finding is they found that states that tend to elect a lot of Republican women to the state legislature tend to enact more pro-life laws than other states did. So we really see that in a lot of these states, it's Republican women who are really kind of leading the charge.
Why? Why?
Well, I think the thing is abortion tends to be a very polarizing issue politically. And I think some men are scared off, or some men in the state legislature, I should say, are scared off from promoting pro-life bills because they get criticism about legislating what some consider to be a women's issue. But if these men know they have the support of women in their caucus and can get the support of pro-life women, they'll feel more comfortable, and I think they'll push for these laws a lot more aggressively.
What about legal challenges to state laws? Where are we?
There's a lot of legal challenges. I mean, there's dismembered abortion bans. I think we'll hear soon whether or not the Supreme Court is going to take that up. It's hard to predict, exactly what challenges they'll take up and how they'll rule. But I do think that with Brett Kavanaugh replacing Justice Kennedy, I do think these protective laws have a much better chance of being upheld.
And what about Neil Gorsuch?
Gorsuch certainly is a good justice. I think that early returns indicate that he'll be supportive as well. And we might have 5 justices who would be willing to support a lot of these protective laws. Again, we can't predict what laws they'll consider or how they'll rule in any case, but certainly I think the future is bright for the pro-life movement legislatively.
Michael New, Associate Scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Don't forget to stay with EWTN for live and complete coverage of the largest pro-life event of the year. Our special March for Life broadcast starts at 9 a.m. Eastern this Friday. We'll have a recap of the march on EWTN News Nightly. Up next, Second Lady Karen Pence has a new job. And Pope Francis says there's one word to use to turn away from sin. Second Lady Karen Pence is returning to teaching. Pence will be teaching art at Emmanuel Christian School 2 days a week. According to its website, it has a parent agreement banning gay students and gay parents from the school. Pope Francis approves the next step in the cause for sainthood for 17 women. Included on the list, Sister Maria del Carmen and 13 of her companions. They were killed at the start of the Spanish Civil War in 1936. The Holy Father also approved a miracle by Swiss laywoman Marguerite Bays, paving the way for her canonization. For more on this story, including details on the life of Blessed Marguerite, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. And finally tonight, we're hearing from Pope Francis. He is reminding us that the faithful God loves us, even when we forget about Him.
Non dimenticatevi mai di dire Padre.
Speaking during the weekly meeting with pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says God will never hide from us, and He loves us unconditionally even when we have sinned. All we have to do is call out the word Father with confidence, and we will receive help. Okay, say it with me. Father! We'll take all the help we can get. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.